Welcome to this episode of Focus on Growth. I'm Tom Doorley of Sage Partners. I'll be your host today. As you know, for the last several months, we've been talking on and working on how it is we all deal with the massive changes that it seems to be hitting us in the face from everywhere. They're massive, they're faster than ever, and they're going to go on forever. So we've taken a line from the whole concept of military battle, the fog of war. In the fog of war, everything gets confusing. Well, we're saying we're in the fog of change. And our idea here is to help you navigate the fog of change. My guest today is somebody who's been on the front line of change and change management for decades. His name is Rick Maurer. Rick, welcome to this episode.
Thanks, Tom. It's good to be here.
So we're going to take this idea that we've been working on and developing and continue to dig deeply into it in terms of how it is we navigate the fog of change, which is difficult. So the first thing we know is that who likes to change? Well, basically nobody, right? We get comfortable doing the things we're doing. And so we have to first make the case that says to our organization, to our enterprise, this is a special time. We need to make a change. How do we make the case, Rick? How do we convince people that, sometimes in the past, maybe it was obvious during COVID, not quite so obvious now, but it's really, really important. So how do we make the case that it's time for change?
Well, first of all, making a case is one of the most overlooked things, even in times of relative stability. People think they get an idea and they move right to action and they leave people in the dust. So now that you've got the fog, and I think that's a good description for it, it's even more important. And what I look at is obviously people need to have the information about either what the threat is or the opportunity. But what's often missing from that are two other components. And the second is an emotional component, is that we need to get it in our gut. I realize I'm hitting my chest here, but get it in our gut that a change is needed, where I go, oh, yeah. Now, it might scare me, but I need to have that, oh, yeah, moment so that I can start to say, what are we going to do? That I get curious. And the third thing that has to be in place is I have to trust the source where I'm getting this information. So, for instance, let's say that we work together, Tom, and I like you and I trust you, and you say, hey, we got to talk, Rick. Here's what's going on in the world. And you give me facts and figures, and I start to get scared. But I'm sticking with you because I trust you. If I didn't trust you, I'd be shutting down right now and ready to call my financial advisor because I got to get out of town. And often we miss with change the emotional and the trust or lack of trust components. And was critical 30 years ago when I started writing about it. It's even more critical right now.
And I agree with that. So you're right that we assume that it's obvious, right? I think change is necessary. Why doesn't everybody see it that way? But it's not. And so the thing you're talking about, trust, I also refer to that as the idea of the authentic leader. The leader has to be sort of true to themselves. And if that's the case, people will deal with it. So let's try and work on that a little bit. So one of the things we say is once we've made the case, the first thing we need to do is to say, what are we going to do about it? And we come up with this idea we call the Leaders Change Agenda. We're teaching to our clients. And the Leaders Change Agenda says, listen, there are all kinds of things we can do, but here are the 5 things or some small number that we're going to stay with, that we're going to continue, what we're going to do with. So we made the case. We've got our change agenda. People are dealing with it. Now, as you point out a lot in our earlier conversations, sometimes things go off the rail. What are the signals that something's not quite what we hoped it would be? And so we have to make some change. So how do you know that? Because these can be very subtle, right? People can be duplicitous. They don't really believe it, so they're undermining it. But more often, it's a situation where maybe they just didn't understand. So what are the signals that you say, hey, wait a minute, something's going off the rails here. We need to make an adjustment.
Okay. Well, not to be simplistic about this, but if you've got a good relationship, people might say, hey, boss, where are you going with this? Mm-hmm. I mean, you might actually get those questions. Quite often what I see is that people get silent and they go through the motions. I remember a CEO told me one time he had come up with some idea and he would go out on the floor and say, how's it going? And people go, great. And he said, it took me 2 months to realize that all I was getting was malicious compliance. People
Yes.
were doing just enough so I'd go
Yeah.
on down the hall. And
Right.
so what we have to pay attention to are people just going through the motions, because people know how to keep their jobs. So though, if you want them to make a list about blah, 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 or put a new priority to stuff, they can do that. What I pay attention to is, this may sound odd, but what does the energy feel like? Like if
Mm.
I'm in a planning meeting and there's something good going on, you can feel it,
Yes, you can.
you know. And so, but if people are there and they're just politely going through the motions and say, okay, the next agenda item, and you want to go to sleep,
Yeah.
uh, it's a real tip off. I mean, that's the first one. And if you can't ask people directly, like they won't tell you, then I would find more informal ways. There's a thing I talk about, coffee with Joe, and everybody has a Joe, and Joe
Yep.
can be either gender. And Joe's the kind of person who will tell it like it is. They do not understand the phrase career limiting move. They will be glad to tell you. And if you can get them aside for a cup of coffee, not lunch is too long, but
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
to say, hey, so Rick, what's your reaction to what's going on? Or what are, don't name names, but what's the word on the street? And often there are people who will give you probably more information than you want, but they really can be really valuable. They can really be valuable canaries in the coal mine, if you will.
I think this is important points. I recall that back during COVID times, we did a series of webinars, and we talked about how you reignite growth when the whole thing is over, which would be some time, and would rebound. And one of the great speakers was a woman who was in charge of uh, King Arthur Baking. Used to be called King Arthur Flour. They extended themselves. And she would call everybody together. Of course, it's a small organization, 400 people, on Zoom, and she'd answer their questions. And she'd say, you can ask me anything. And the big thing she did, which I thought was really, it made your case that you can tell me anything. She would say, if she didn't know something, I don't know that. She didn't try to say, well,
Brilliant.
blah, blah, blah,
Brilliant.
and sort of pass over. She said, nope, you got me. I don't understand that. Next time I'll have a better answer. So give me a break. And that sort of, I think it also builds to your point about trust. I
Yeah.
would trust somebody like that to tell me the real story. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I used to do work with a big company, and they would bring their up and coming managers together for, like, I think 4 weeks over the course of a year. And at the kickoff meeting, the COO kicked off the meeting, which was he didn't send a substitute. He didn't do a video. He was there, and he said, the reason I'm here is you're the future of our company. And I'm here. And he said, I just wanted to welcome you. But he said, I want to give you a choice because we got an hour. I've got the PowerPoint show that we show investors. I'm glad to turn it on. It's really well done. Or we don't have to turn the computer on, and I can just field questions. I was in the back of the room maybe 15 to 20 times. I never heard the audience say, show us the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Yes.
And what was brilliant is people would start with really easy questions.
Yeah.
No threat. But as they realize this guy is being straight, like he could say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or say things that people might not want to hear. People got braver with their questions. And by the end of the hour, I had people with him. In fact, one time I took my group and I said, how many is this the first time you ever saw this guy? And it was true for most people. I said, if he walked in right now and say, I need somebody to really help me with a big project, and it's probably going to take 9 months to a year, and you're going to have to drop everything else. And I can't say more about it because I just don't know more about it. So here he doesn't know. And I said, would any of you volunteer? And most people said, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, why? And they said, because we trust him. And I said, you just met him. Why do you trust him? And they said, because he's straightforward. If he doesn't know, he tells us. And if he knows, he's really clear and he's respectful. So it's a really simple thing, but it's missing so often.
Yeah. So this idea of signals is really important because there's so much change going on that leaders change agenda. That's not going to last very long in that form. Years ago, back in the halcyon days of strategy consulting, right, we put together 5-year plans. And 5-year plans are meant to last 5 years. Today, if you're trying to put together a 5-year plan, well, you can have goals, you can have images, you can have themes for the 5 years, but you better be willing to change. And so in order to change, you need to read the signals that we're talking about. And one of the things that we've been telling our clients and sharing with the world is there are two capabilities that we need right now and to read these signals. One capability we call lookouts. My sage partner, Larry Beddingson, was a naval officer, and he was on the bridge of a ship. And when they went into a fog bank, he'd say, I need some help. So he'd call up more lookouts. They were there to watch out for danger, something coming, an iceberg or whatever that they might hit before they got it. That was their role. But at this time where there's so much change going on, one of the big things is everything's up for grab. New products, new ways of getting to the market, new customers, all that sort of thing. So we also need what we call scouts, who are opportunity seekers. And you know your psychology, I know my psychology. It is difficult, if not impossible, to have these two things in the same person. So we need to have lookouts, we need to have scouts. So
Yeah.
how do you embed this idea of scouts, opportunity seekers, lookouts, danger sensors into the organization? How do you work with that?
First of all, I agree with you. Both of those rules are very critical. Well, the first thing is that people need to know that it's safe to carry that role. I mean, in some organizations, that if you're the lookout, people roll their eyes and go, "Oh, here he comes again."
Yeah.
So the one thing is, unless you've actually designated a human being and they've got that hat on or something,
Yeah.
is when they come to you, that you're really respectful of what you're hearing.
Yeah.
And you're curious and say, wait a minute, this is new to me. Tell me more about this. And if you can still be polite if somebody really is kind of out of sync with what's going on, but often you'll start to find that people are coming to you and saying, hey, here's what I'm noticing. I'm on the lookout, or I think we're missing that. And when people know that you as the leader or the leadership team are really open to hearing that, I rarely see that abused,
Yeah.
but I see that the leaders who can take it in, it's almost liberating. Maybe that's too strong a word, but it's like, wow, we're and people start to feel we're in this together.
Yeah. And there's no question that the people on the front lines, they're getting information that the folks in the C-suite don't get. And so that's really important. So years ago, there was a client, and the client brought people together doing one of these brainstorming sessions to try to find new ideas because they needed to reignite growth. It was important to them. And they would keep coming up with people these ideas. So, oh, well, we don't do that here. No, we don't do that here. So finally, the CEO got so frustrated, I think he slammed his feet, or his hands on the table and said, damn it, the next person that says that is out of this room. Or you got a choice. You can take us all to dinner. I choose the restaurant, so it's going to cost you $2,500. So which is it? And so he stopped it. But you could say, we don't do that now. Here's what we'd have to do. But you can't just shut it down. But it's your point of you got to be open to the input, right?
Yeah.
You got to allow people a chance to. And sometimes it's a dumb idea, but you got to let them. You got to let them bring it forward.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Sure.
Okay. So some leaders have the kind of relationship where they could go into a room of 100 people and handle a conversation like that. For others, that's a real mistake, because they may, two things, they may start to shut down and get defensive, like the person you just talked about, or they may over-explain. And I see leaders do this all the time. You ask a simple question that you could say, no, go down to the corner where the red barn is and turn right. They make it a half-hour speech, and so people just shut up. So if you know that you're a person who really, you can listen best when you're one-on-one or with a small group, that's where I would start.
Yeah, I tell you, listening is really important. One of the most valuable things I learned when I first joined my first consulting firm, a wonderful company doesn't exist anymore called Arthur D. Little. They offered a course in listening. It was 4 or 5 hours after work, 4 or 5 days in a row, and you just built in listening, which is really important. So I find if you can't listen, you're not going to be a very good leader, frankly, right?
I agree. Right. I agree completely.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about too is that in anything we do, any initiative we take, we want to create value.
Yeah.
The title of my book was called Value Creating Growth. We want to get value out of growth. So in this case, we have a process here, a change management process, navigating the fog of change process that is not amenable to the same kinds of benchmarks and milestones as you would if you were chasing market share. So, Rick, how do you help your clients understand how they're creating? First of all, you do want them to create value, obviously, but how do you understand and to mark the case that yeah, we're creating value, or we need to crank it up some more?
There are I've identified these pockets of energy that go with most changes, and I will not go through all of those. But the first one and the last one are critically important. And the first one is that making a case.
Yeah,
That people know, oh, something big is out there. We got to do something. And
yeah,
I think you and I just talked about that pretty thoroughly. But the other one that ought to be talked about right on the heels of that is, so what is success going to look like?
yeah,
Not how are we going to do it, not who's going to do it, but moving right from that first place all the way to successful completion
yeah.
is really critical. Edwin Locke used to be at University of Maryland, and he did research on motivation at work. And he said the biggest motivator was clear goals.
Hmm.
And I was able to interview him once, and I can't remember if he said this or I said this, but
Take credit for it.
I'll
Credit
take
for
okay,
it.
I'll take
Yeah,
credit.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
the notion you're going out to golf and it's a beautiful day and you're there with your friends and you're on the first tee and you look down the fairway. It's a
yeah,
beautiful fairway. You can see the green, and you go, "This is going to be a great day." And so you drive the ball and you finally get to the green, and there's no hole there,
yeah.
and you go, "Huh." And you look around and go, "Oh, well, it's a nice day. I'm here with friends." By about the third hole, you're going to get bored,
Yes.
and that's put that one stupid little hole in, you got
Yeah.
yourself a game that people
Yeah.
are committed to. And so that really, I think, was the heart of what he was saying, that people need to have that. But then he did further research with a guy named Gary Latham and said, yes, that's important, but challenging goals are even more important, because that's what gets us up going, oh, I bet I could run that fast. Oh, I bet I could cut those, strokes off my score. It's the challenge that really motivates many of us. And so I would say, even if I'm not sure where things are going, the fact that we've
Yeah.
identified there's a problem, then to say, all right, so what could success look like? If we're going to start working on something, how do we know that we're even on the right track? And I really believe having that sign out there
Yeah.
that we can look up and go, oh yeah, that's where we're headed, is really important. And I find that missing a lot.
Yeah, I like that idea of these clear goals, because we want to know what success looks like. That's a great line, and then we measure ourselves against it as we go along, and we need what I call leading indicators. So before we get to the end, we want to know that we're making progress towards the goal we want. I think that's really important. I think that's the type of thing that says it kind of brings us together as an organization.
Yeah.
So, as you see the current um, environment for change, would you say that we're at a point where we, in general, kind of feel that it's happening and it's about time to do it, or are we still kind of struggling through and saying, yeah, this too shall pass?
It really saddens me to say that this too shall pass, I think, is more
Yeah,
what's going on. Some people in Denmark just wrote a book this year called Intelligent Change. And what they did is they really looked at the research, not one person's model or any of that, but the research on successful change and failed change. And I was able to read it and ran a podcast with them. And what amazed me about it is, when I first started writing about this in the mid 90s, the failure rate is still as high, even though we know much more about change.
yeah,
And a lot of it is, people, with what we were talking about at the beginning, they were confused. They don't know this is a problem.
yeah,
They get into things, and if they get into things and they don't know what's going on, they're just going to go through the motions. I mean,
yeah.
I think all of that is still there, and I think we're missing real opportunities, and the fog is just going to make it worse.
Yeah,
That's
and that is
noted.
that is in fact, yeah, no, that's right, and that is a message that we're taking out to our clients, that I think we all saw COVID as a terrible thing. But we figured we'd get through it, right? And it'd be a lot of damage and all that sort of thing. But we could see the end.
Yes.
We shouldn't do that here because given that just take technology, the pace of technology is such that man, it's barely started. AI, for example, has barely started, right? And
Yeah.
we're making all kinds of mistakes, which we do early on. So if you think it's going to be, well, we'll hunker down, we'll get through this, that's not the case. And so we need to have this continuous change concept that is really important. Yeah,
Yeah. But
yeah,
can I just say something about AI?
sure. Yeah, of course.
I think one of the things we really have to watch out for is just seeing it as a technological innovation,
Yeah,
which it is, of course, but it's got a huge emotional component. Like,
yeah,
am I going to have a job next week?
yeah,
Are my kids going to have? I mean, it's just huge, and this fear that what's going to happen to my career, to my projects, and all of that. And AI is here to stay, obviously, and it's
yeah,
going to get bigger and better or worse. It's going to get bigger, whatever, and more
yeah,
complex. And I
yeah,
think we need to pay attention to the human component as we do
yeah.
that. And I certainly don't have answers other than that's a big place where we need to keep our eyes open.
It is interesting. This is the third time in my podcast series where that issue has actually come up. That maybe it's not too absurd or too outlandish to call it the existential threat. Because if AI is taking away from work, even if there's enough resource to allow us to relax, people have purpose when they're going to work, when they're doing something, when they're making something, delivering something, changing something. And that sense of purpose is important. So we have the issue on the table. You've got it. Maybe I'd assemble a group, you and several others, us, to talk about, okay, the issue's on the table. What are we going to do? Because this has an enormous cultural impact. It's
Yeah.
great. So Rick, thank you very much for the conversation. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, how should they do it?
Well, best way is my email, which is rick@rickmaurer.com. I don't know if you're going to have a spelling of my name up, but it's
Yes.
okay.
Ray will do that for us. Yes.
Okay. And if you just go to rickmaurer.com, you get my website, and there's all kinds of a lot of free stuff right there too. So a lot of
Yeah.
the things would not quite as up to date as our conversation today, but there's a lot of, I think, some pretty good things there. So
Yes, there is. And I actually get you get a feed that you send around to folks on your follow list that I get and I read. And so here's the idea that as I see it, and I'm talking now to our audience. We've got this enormous sets of change that's hitting us. We need to deal with it. Rick, I would put in the category of not part of Sage, but a friend of Sage. And as we move forward, Rick is going to be part of working with those of you out there to try to deal with the issues you face. So we welcome the conversation. We welcome the engagement because this is really an important time. Thank you all for listening. Until next time, take care and be well. Change has never come faster or hit us harder. In the fog, leadership is the light that cuts through. I'm Tom Doorley. Thanks for joining me on our Focus on Growth, Navigating the Fog of Change series. Until the next time, keep leading forward.